Shulman. I knew you were coming back. And we are going to have the final round of our conference, I suppose. We have about an hour for a roundtable discussion, which will allow us to sum up some of the points, to probably ask more questions too, because I think it would be nice if we had more interaction. I mean, we probably have a good time just talking amongst ourselves, but that's not the purpose of the round table, and this is why it's not round, you know, like, you know, because otherwise it's quite a boring thing to, you know, put people in a room and then have the audience watching from outside. So we don't want that, you know, we want some interaction, so please interrupt us, you know, shout, yell, raise your hands, whatever, in the middle of our discussion, and, you know, join us, because many of the issues we'll be talking about will be things that have been discussed so far, that have not been exhausted during the sessions we had yesterday and today, because there's indeed so much to say about the topics that came up about Salma's writing, but also about modern Tamil writing in general. And one of the ideas of this roundtable is to talk about modern Tamil literature more generally, the way that we got a wonderful introduction from Chalapathy already, who's raced us through the you know, past about 60 years of Tamil literature. Unfortunately, omitting you know, 2,000 years before that, but you know, well, you can't have it all on one single weekend, right? So, and we'll come back to that, and the question of heritage and what it means to you know, carry around a burden of that kind of literary history. I'm still reasonably well struck, I should say, by just seeing the movie, and you know, by all the things that came up during the movie, and that I haven't quite been able to digest for myself, as it were. So it's probably a really boring and trite thing to do what I originally wanted to do, and which is just to say that, you know, I'm a literary historian, so I'm interested in you know, a long durée or a longer period perspective on things, and I think that we are witnessing a really amazing moment in the history of Tamil literature here right now in Chicago, but also something that, you know, started a couple of years ago and will continue hopefully for many more years. And this is not only Salma's birthday, which, you know, is the shortest of the moment, but we've talked about how times can be perceived differently, and how you might adopt different perspectives. When this novel is a unique moment so far in Tamil literary history, the novel that we've been talking about so far, because Chalapathy pointed that out. There is an earlier novel by a Tamil Muslim woman, but that is something quite different, and you can talk more about that actually if you want. This is the first real novel, one might say, about written by a Tamil Muslim woman about the experience of Muslim women, and I really liked Sam's comment saying that by writing this novel, Salma has opened up a world that is the world of women, and a world of female experience to a male audience and to a male readership. And that's something that is, I find very interesting, because it's something that is also interculturally significant, because it is so diverse and it varies so much if you change your location. In other words, what it means for me to read as a male person, to read Salma's poetry and to read her writing in general, is something entirely different from what it means, of course, for male persons in Tamil Nadu, male persons who know her much better than I do, who live much closer to where she lives. But this is a work that is now, if not last year, or, you know, when the first translations came out, it's a work that is now circulating in a much larger sphere, and that is about, because of all the other translations which are about to come out, that is about to be circulating even wider, in even wider spheres, and attract very different minds, you know, sort of leave an impression on people with very different histories. And I would like us to think about what it means for Tamil literature in general, for contemporary Tamil writing, to be circulating within India, maybe within Tamil Nadu first, and then, you know, within India, and then within a wider sphere, and just think about problems connected to that. And I will sort of have specifically things to say as we discuss these issues to pin that down some more. The other thing I was struck with was something that Jayashankar just said in the Q&A after the film, when you said we thought that poetry has long lost its subversive potential, right? I mean, that is possibly a view that many of us have or had, or right? I mean, that is a common view that you would find a lot when you talk to people about poetry. For many people, the world is divided into two kinds of people: those people who like poetry and those who don't. I teach poetry in the college all the time, European poetry, Asian poetry, and you get very different responses. And sometimes, however, you meet people who thought they didn't like poetry, and then you present them with a particular kind of poetry, and they start liking it, or they start realizing that they actually always liked it, but they just didn't know they liked it. So we have literature here which is not the abstract literature. I said that early on too, because it's something that is something I think that should always be renewed when we talk about our perspectives that we adopt vis-a-vis this literature. It's something that is not an abstract literary corpus. It is something that we could do the usual things. We could do a narratological analysis of this very multifaceted novel and just talk about who gets to speak and how is the action that's portrayed in the novel, how is that mediated through various narrative voices. But that leaves out so much, and that leaves out the very real social function that literature has, and that the documentary film we just saw has a great role, plays a great role in bringing that role closer to us, that function of literature, which you may call it the subversive potential, you may just call it more general the social function, something that gets obfuscated sometimes when we read literature in translation, or we read literature from other places, divorced from their original moorings, as it were. So let's start with a question of, what does it mean for Tamil literature to circulate? This entails question of translations. What does it mean? Where can it circulate? Where can it not go? Are there places where you don't want Tamil literature translated at all? Do you think it's translatable in the first place? What gets lost? What doesn't get lost? Can we think about these? And somebody should just start talking about them. I won't call upon, unless you want me to. I can, call up people. But
it might also be helpful, I think, for someone to perhaps fill Salma in.
Yeah, exactly. I was hoping that.
Give on the rough idea.
You should respond. You've been translating for quite some time. How have you perceived the shifts in the reception to your translations? How did you first go about translating modern Tamil texts? How did you choose them? How were they received? How did they define your further choices?
Well, I started translating with, I think, C.S. Lakshmi, her short story, which I used in a collection of short stories that I edited, The Inner Courtyard. And I was researching at the time women.
Yeah, it needs to be pretty close, actually. Yeah, thanks.
I'm sorry.
Women writers, and I was looking particularly at the women writers in the Indian languages, because so much attention was being paid to material in English. And people, I live in England, and it seemed to me that people in England simply assumed that literature, Indian literature, meant Indian literature in English. And this was the reason why I suggested to Virago this collection of stories by Indian women, and particularly paying attention to those written in the regional languages. And I went to India to research that, and then I met C.S. Lakshmi, and I absolutely fell in love with her work. It sounded to me, it seemed to me astounding. And I just had to translate them. But then I have to say I've always played with translation. Translation is one of my challenges, activities, games that I play. So it was, I just went into that, and then I've not stopped translating since then. And I've translated a variety of texts. Now, I'm not sure how much these are read. Certainly they're read in India. I think we have a culture in India now of reading translation and using translation at universities, at school level, and people read translation simply to know what is happening in other languages. I don't think there is this culture of reading translation that much elsewhere. I don't know about America, but I have to say it doesn't exist that much in England. My ideal is for books in translation, C.S. Lakshmi, Salma, Pudhimepittan, these works to be available in the ordinary bookstore, so that somebody who loves literature can just pick them off and read them.
Like 100 Years of Solitude, which is available in all bookstores.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I don't see that happening. I do see translation being used in specific areas, maybe in universities, maybe where people are interested very specifically in Indian literatures, or in translation studies, or in women's studies. There's a niche. But I hate to see literature being used as evidence or sociological material or any of those. I want to see a short story being read for the beauty of its literary form as much as anything else, really. For the sheer pleasure of the storytelling, the narrative, the language. But I'm pessimistic about that. I'm not sure that it's happening. I don't know. I would like to be assured otherwise.
Lakshmi, you might know that the reception to your translation of Ashok Mitran's Water, Tanir. I think the original edition didn't do well. I think the book was reminded. I saw lots of copies in Chennai. But when Qatar republished it, it was so well received, and it is now part of Tamil legend that Paul Zakaria, who reviewed this book in tehevka.com, he had a beautiful passage in it. He said, "No, this book came for review. I picked up this novel with the usual disdain and intellectual contempt that the Malayali has for Tamil." And when I read it, I looked at it, this book was first published in 1971. And I think, I've wasted 25, 30 years of my life. If I had read this book 25 years ago, I would have been a better writer and a better novelist. So I do think that, writing is not just used as footnote for sociological treatises. People do read them. That said, I'm somewhat surprised and curious at this particular moment when she mentioned the inner courtyard, that during these 2 days, none of us ever mentioned Susi Taru and Lalita's women writing in India. I think perhaps it has become so much part of ourselves. We don't see it as something that is outside us. I think it helped us fundamentally fundamentally change our views about women writing. I remember one of these lines in J.J. Salakuripagan, where there's absolute contempt for women writers. And also I think in a sense it reflects Sundar Ramswamy's view at one particular point in time, because of course who would want to take Sivasankari or Indumati seriously? But that completely changes with the publication of, I think, women's writing in India. On the one hand, it was a contributory history. It opened up an entirely new archive of writing by women across some 15, 20 languages, made us rethink the category of what is writing, how normative should one be, and how does one look into questions of identity and gender in writing. I think it fundamentally changed our views about it. And from that moment on, I think, our attitude towards literary texts have been inflected not just by our theoretical concerns, but also, the experiential aspect of literature.
Let's talk for a moment about the issue you just brought up with, that you would like these translations to be available in the corner bookstore, as it were.
There aren't any left of those.
There aren't any of those bookstores left, but well, maybe the equivalent of that in the modern world would be the airport bookshop, or the one in the train station, or
Amazon.
Or Amazon.com, where you actually find quite a number of Tamil literature in translation. I mean, the writing of Perumal Murugan in Gita's translation is available there. You can order it, which is what I did. It comes, from US distributors. So there is a very obvious reason, which is the distribution, right? If you publish a book in India, it often doesn't really get ever to the London booksellers because it's distributed in such a way that, it never arrives there unless it's Oxford University Press. And even then, the Indian imprints, don't often make it there. But there's of course also a question about the content and the specificity, the regional character of the writing, which is something that very famously has been and very contemptuously has been taken up by Salman Rushdie when he published his anthology of Indian writing in 1997. I remember being at the book launch function when he was there, and he was vilified by everybody because he had written in his preface that this is the best selection from contemporary Indian writing, and there was only one story in translation from Hindi, and everything was in English. And he said, I have read everything that is available in all the translations from all the languages. And I decided that after that I can say, I have made an empirical study, and after that I can say that the best writing from India is what is produced in English. And, and this one Hindi short story that had been translated there. And of course people in the audience stood up and tried to fight that idea, but of course, he's a stubborn person, so he didn't really want to hear any of that. And this created a huge scandal. EPW wrote about it, and many other online magazines wrote about it back in '97. That's 10 years ago. So, if you take away the quoting, the provocative quoting that Rushdie always tends to give his statements, there is a lingering question left of, what is it that travels, for example, about Garcia Marquez's writing, or writing in general from Southern America, which we pick up, I'm myself a displaced person, and I say we, so people in Germany do it the same way that people do it in England, or even in Russia or in the Czech Republic. They read, Latin American translations, and they don't even think of this as being translated work. I know that, especially Garcia Marquez and some other writers are really, out there as writers. And people often, they buy a book, you give it to somebody as a present, but you don't give it to somebody as a sample of Latin American writing.
Precisely.
So would you say that there is an inherent quality to, well, first of all, Indian writing and then Tamil writing that makes it difficult for that to happen, or is it just because it's a simple distribution problem and a pragmatic problem, and people haven't yet realized the beauties of Tamil literature?
No,
David, do you have
it's not. First of all, I want to say I don't believe this is a statistical problem, and in fact, I don't even care how many people read these books. To be honest, I mean, how many copies did Srinath sell? I mean, you need maybe 20 wonderful readers. That's more than enough. If you had 20 readers for J.J. Kuripuhar in English, that would be if they were the right readers. Right? So I don't, the whole problem of circulation, distribution doesn't interest me very much. And I'm not even sure that we would be better off if we had, everybody in airports. I don't like those airport bookshops anyway. I don't really think that there's very much to read in those things. I don't think that's the question. I do want to say though that some of the Tamil materials do not travel well. That's true. In fact, J.J. Kuripuhar, you have to be really rather immersed in the South Indian Tamil scene. The nuances, I mean, you can't understand it otherwise. The beauty of the book, it is highly specific to Tamil. However, I think that Imayam's Koviru Karudayal actually has a universal appeal and may yet, may it go, I mean, it's still quite early in a way, but since your translation of that. In fact, I have a feeling that the more recent materials that are coming out now in Tamil, in the last 10 years, we're in a different phase actually, I think, and some of them are perhaps more translatable. That's my feeling. Yeah. Maybe Salma's novels, I have to read it, and I don't know.
I have to say that Bama's work has traveled.
And a comment, I mean, what I find in terms troubling and perfectly understandable is the fact that the gender aspect makes certain pieces of literature travel better. And on the one hand, that's troubling because I do wonder, are we sort of fetishizing this particular aspect of South Asian literature that itself is a process that is coming out of really colonialism with, those poor oppressed women in British India now transposed into the post-colonial world. I mean, that's something that is troubling, that kind of motivation. But on the other hand, there is something there is a universality to these kinds of gendered problems, and therefore this is understandable. And I say this with mixed feelings as someone who teaches the gender and South Asian literature class here in Chicago. And I know it gets the students in the course. If it was just South Asian literature, probably the enrollment would be half. But it gets people interested in a way that literature itself does not. So it's an interesting question. I mean, I wonder when Salma's book comes out, when her novel comes out in English, it probably will experience, more circulation because of its female content, and that is maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. Ultimately, a good thing, I guess.
Well, I would modern classics like Tamil, Ashok Mitran's Water, which is a beautiful book, and I think has certain qualities of universality. I don't know whether it's known outside India. Of course, it's known in India, Chalapathy, and I'm very glad that Sakara gave it that particular review. But he's a great writer. He should be known better in the world. That's what makes me really sad, to say the least.
Narayana Rao had a question or remark.
Well, just a small comment. Actually, I've been watching all the conference has been going on since yesterday morning. I'm immensely pleased that one literature is being actually discussed in such a depth, particularly the 20th century literature. But I venture to make a few comments which I hope will have some usefulness, if not, we just reject them. My worry is that what's happening in Tamil Nadu is also happening in Telugu. All you need to just change the name and it becomes applicable to Telugu, nothing needed. And I speak mostly from the Telugu perspective because I understand that more or less what was happening in Tamil Nadu also. What I have felt in the last almost 30 years or so, is that literature has become the voice to express social issues. Problems that society has to handle probably in prose, in dealing with other ways. Literature has become this arena in which everything is being talked about. So it becomes a little bit difficult for me to distinguish what is literature here and what is social issue here. Yes, women are being exploited. Low class are exploited. Dalits are exploited. Brahmins are upper caste and they have taken all the great goodwill of society. This is a social fact. But when we're discussing literature, I think literature has to be discussed slightly independently. When I'm dealing with Kalidasa, I don't think I'll be talking about whether there were Dalits at that time who did not write and Kalidasa was the only one who was writing. Or anything of that sort. What we should be discussing is what the literary about this. Why should we have interested a person who is interested in literature? Or is literary unimportant? Are we just looking at the social events, social facts, which unfortunately or fortunately are not talked about by other people, and poets are bringing to us, and we are thankful to them. Is that one? That's one issue in my mind. The other thing is the problem of translation. English becomes the dominant language. If something is translated into English, then it's translation. If it is translated into other languages, for example, in Indian language, it's not translation. Third issue I'm interested in is, into English not everything translates well. For example, Spanish translates well into English. Telugu does not translate as well as Spanish does into English. German translates very well into English. And doesn't, for example, Tamil does not translate exactly as well into English. You appreciate English translation only if it looks like an English work. You are already made a compromise of making it look like an English work. What I want to see actually is a reader to be translated into text, rather than the text to be translated into reader. If there is an opportunity of understanding what is the culture here, what exactly are the things we need to know, probably the text will be better understood. And even relatively less beautiful translations than the one we are reading from Lakshmi Holmström will then be appreciated. So translations are not simply a matter of, make it available in English and everybody in the corner bookstore will start reading it. And in fact, a lot of people who live that way in India. A small point I want to make, and this may be something the writers need to pay attention to. This is my personal experience. Modern writing, especially when you are translating into another language like English, there is a hurdle called the copyright. The original author, especially in some of the experience I have a very unrealistic understanding what an English translation published in the United States will achieve. They immediately imagine every book published in the United States is going to make $1 million. And therefore they ask us extraordinary conditions for giving translation rights. One of the reasons why modern writers are not being translated into English as more frequently than they are now is perhaps this copyright experience. Writers have to probably pay a little more attention to it. If they read their work, they need their work brought into other languages to say, okay, we understand the situation there. This will be the copyright condition. That has not happened in Andhra yet. I hope it has been happening in Tamil Nadu. Thank you.
You had a question? Kristen, you had?
I did.
Not anymore.
That was very intensive. But in response to something that Rokkiah was saying, that I think I was going to ask, or say something about in response to something that Valerie was saying, is that this question of social issues and gender, and not wanting to read literature for a social issue only. It seems to me that one of the things that differentiates good literature from reading a work of, about, a New York Times article on women, the condition of women in India, is the specificity of the emotional experience and the specificity of the aesthetic experience and expression of that experience. And that's something that I agree completely that unless, let's say you're teaching a class of students and it's women and gender and you're teaching a short story, if the class doesn't know something about the fabric of that culture, they're not going to experience it emotionally at the same, on so many levels. But it seems like unless we have more of these stories translated, you're not going to be able to experience that possibility of emotional contact with a writer's world. But it's the specificity that I wanted to respond to in what you were saying, and then also the question of, well, yes, I think it is really troubling when you're starting to read stories because they're by women and because they're about gender issues. That's a problem. But if it's beautifully written with great emotional detail, then that makes all the difference. That's the point.
I'd like to make just some points about a number of things that have been said. First, has poetry lost its subversive edge? It's a kind of a fascinating idea. Poetry in the US has made a big comeback recently. And nobody was more surprised than English teachers, because poetry slams, very urban kinds of events, things that were completely outside of the academic system, have made poetry have a kind of status now here that it didn't have before. And so that I think is very exciting. I also want to quote one thing that was said by a Kannada poet and playwright to me, which is that in the village, people even lament in poetry. And we sometimes think of poetry here in the US in English as being a kind of a highbrow, elite kind of utterance. But poetry actually was the stuff that oral narratives were made of. Fairy tales have so many repeating formulas. I mean, I think we need to give poetry the opportunity to be. I mean, I was so fascinated, Salma, by the fact that you read Whitman. And Walt Whitman is one of those poets who has really had an impact on many writers outside of the US and outside of English. And so, you know, to me, this suggests that poetry has not lost its subversive edge. Second point, I think that there is a problem with the publication area, and not that you can't get the books at your corner store, or that, or some other reason, but that publishers have put certain kinds of limits on writers. For example, if any of you have published translations recently, you'll know that if you try to do something with most publishers, even university press publishers, they will limit the amount, the length that your introductory essay can be. And an introductory essay to a piece of writing from another country can be what gives the reader the information that's needed in order to understand the literary conventions of the genre. And if you don't have that, you may read a text in ignorance and completely misunderstand what's going on. So I think that publishers really do need to have a little bit more responsibility to give that kind of material. I don't mean that that a text should be weighed down with hundreds of footnotes. In fact, I prefer to have no footnotes and explain things in the introduction in a way that is expository. But I do think that that's an important issue. Narayana Rao, I think that Japanese is also hard to translate into English, but it seems like in Japanese translations there's a lot more success in getting those books into circulation. So I do think that there's something that needs to be done in order to get, say, Tamil literature, Telugu literature, the kind of audience it deserves. Finally, about the issue of representation, I think that this conference would be a failure if we went out of it thinking, what's important about Salma's novel is that it's the first Tamil Muslim women's novel. Because just being first is not the reason why we found 2 days worth of conversation and discussion about it. I think that we have to be very careful that we're not sort of taking the so-called South Asian oppressed woman and sticking her into American curriculum. And it's not something that's done in North India among Muslim women. There were many Muslim women, some of them significant authors, who would not fit into that kind of stereotype. And I think that's another problem with having Indian literature in the bookstores. They need some kind of context so that they don't assume that what's in this one book that they read on India is necessarily representative. I've often felt that one of the things that people have not worked hard enough to understand is the multiplicity of Indian cultures. And it might be good if they did. Maybe they'd be learning something else about the multiplicities of American culture as well, if they did that. Sorry to have gone on so long.
Just I would like to once again try to address both Narayana Rao Garu's point and the comment that Lakshmi made. What I'm going to say is not going to please Lakshmi at all, in the sense that it is the political and social context, which actually decides the importance of text. Whatever we might think of the text, that is how the market works. You translated M.M.'s novel. M.M.'s novel was published in 1991, but 15 years earlier, a novel of equal ambition and equal or more accomplishment was Poomani's Piragu. but it was never noticed because in the 70s, the Tamil novel was not discussing caste at all. But by the early 90s, Dalit issue became very important, so people began reading it. Ambai rode the wave of the early feminism. And Salma's work is now seen in the context of not just gender, but also in the context of Islam and the global situation and Islam. But at the same time, I don't think any text can just write this kind of way. Say, I'll take names. Sivasankari's novels have been translated into English. Vasanti's novels have been translated into English. I don't think anybody takes it seriously. Has it received any critical attention at all? No, not at all, because the texts do not stand up to any kind of scrutiny. That's where Narayana Rao Garu's point comes in. Unless a text is a literary text, it cannot really stand. And there's the other aspect also, the question of how translations have been received by the publishers and the market. It seems to me that publishers, when translations in English are published, publishers in the market do not want, or I would say this, they want exoticism. They do not want, for instance, just a few weeks ago, I was reading this review of Anand, the Malayalam writer Anand's novel, Govardhanode Yatregal, Travels of Govardhan, translated into English by Geeta Krishna Kutti. The review is very clear about what it wants to say. We don't want your ideas and your philosophical explorations. How you have absorbed philosophical ideas from the West, and how you are. We don't want ideas. We have enough of them in English. Europeans, the West has the monopoly over the novel of ideas. You please give us exotic stories about your country. We want to know about women, unknown communities. We want to know the tale of the tamarind tree. This is, I can see that, I also have experienced it at one level, in the personal level, in the sense that, J.J. Kuripugal, my translation, it was not really noticed at all. A book which, I think, changed a whole generation of readers and writers in Tamil Nadu, didn't do well in English at all, except that it sold really well in Kerala. That's a different matter. But others don't want it. But I would think that that novel has a lot of things to say. It is a literary novel, in the sense of writing about literature. I thought it would make a lot of sense to various writers and various writers all over India, because it talks about the politics of writing. The lobbying among writers, the politics of writing, all these things come in. But it seems that people do not want it in English. They say, please serve up exotic stuff.
No, you just, a couple of minutes, you looked as if you wanted to say something. So
no.
You don't have to.
Well, the problem is, of course, is that I am an interloper here. I'm not a literary scholar by any stretch. And I feel indicted, not by you intentionally, I feel self-indicted, because I do see literature as social practice, and the way that I look at it is as indices of transformations of one sort or another. The very fact that this becomes, and I was struck by the film, the way and the consciousness of the writers themselves as engaging in a structural transformation, that by saying, look, we are doing something that everybody's been doing all the time. The mere fact that we are women doing it is causing you trouble. Now this is, from an anthropological point of view, forgive me, really amazing and interesting, and not entirely unprecedented in the world, and certainly when it comes to things like the formation, again, forgive me, formation of public spheres, which are predominantly masculine arenas of activity, and were defined as such, which is something we forget because it's entirely unmarked until somebody ruptures it in some way. So and Narayana Rao, sir, is of course exactly right. It doesn't, unless of course, and I think Kirsten is also echoing this, it works because, not only because it's a structural transformation, not only because it's social and political practice, but also because it raises goosebumps, or makes you vomit, or does something else that literature is supposed to do, which is, and then I think David is making this point as well, and as was Paul, I mean, that it's, and these things are not separate, I don't think. I don't think that the aesthetic impact is separate from the larger social structural transformations that we're witnessing. In fact, I think that's exactly why you have visceral responses to the fact that women are writing about their own bodies in such a fashion. So no, I didn't want to say anything at all.
I don't think that's a question. We're talking about texts which are seeking social transformation, but also have literary qualities. When none of us is I think, in conflict over that. It's in the way they are read and in the way they are taught. I think I'm with Professor Narendra, that the aesthetic qualities ought also to be appreciated and looked at, and how they actually work. I want us to look at how Salma has actually put together this marvelous novel, and not just the issues that are raised. This is, to me, extremely important, and there's as much a contribution there to extending Tamil literature as in the issues raised. And as for subversion, may I just make this one more point and I'll shut up. As for poetry and subversion, some of the finest Tamil poetry that is appearing now is from the Sri Lankans. And this is subversive, if anything is. It's political, if anything is. And it's, my God, it's visceral. Well, yeah. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about, the best of them, Sivaramani, and we're talking about Cheru. And some of the fine poetry that's coming from the poets in exile. Tirumavalavan, Cheriya.
K.P. Aravindan.
K.P. Aravindan. Now these are, they are subversive, they are political, and they are truly extending Tamil literature as well. But we need to look at both those things. We deny the literary qualities or forget the literary qualities at our peril. These are what are going to take us forward.
Can I just add something to that? Let's talk a little bit about the diaspora and how much it can actually help us. I mean, if we want to be sure that Indian literature is read outside of India, the fact that there are many Indians living outside of India is a very, it could be a resource for us, because we assume that we have to explain everything about Indian life. We have to have a footnote about this and a footnote about that. But actually, we don't expect that when we read some Japanese literature in translation. Russian novels. Salma read so many Russian novels. The translations were terrible, but that literature still made an impact. So I think that that maybe there's some way that as a group of academics, we could do something to jumpstart the situation, to make it if there are series, I know that in England, the London Arts Council has done many things to just give a little bit of momentum to translation.
Well, I should probably say something about giving momentum to translation, since you bring this up. I mean, there are plans underway at the moment for establishing a prize for translation from Tamil and Malayalam that I'm involved with, and I can't say much more about it because it's really in its infancy right now. But this will be something which will be a subsidy specifically and hopefully for translators who are based in India, but who will be then published outside of India and in India by a bigger publishing house. So I can't say much more, not because I'm secret manga, but because it's all up in the air up until now. But I mean, and people in our department have had similar ideas for the other Indian literatures, and yes, I think there is something. People like us who are professionally involved with that kind of literature have an important role in disseminating it and showing up channels where that literature could travel and how it could travel and where it can go. On the other hand, I disagree about not needing footnotes for Japanese and Russian novels. Sometimes I need, I'm German, but I wish I had footnotes in German novels, because the experience of reading, even though it's your own language, even though it's your own society, I mean, a part of the reading experience is this alienation, or bridging the gap of one person speaking to another, and just filling in all these things that people understand or don't understand, right? I mean, famously with Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, which has so many people have liked. People who didn't know anything about the Middle Ages loved that novel just as a fantastic crime thriller, and the medievalists went berserk over it and published book after book with a deciphering of all the things that he had put into that. And he, of course, very sophisticatedly always, he was asked so many times, when you say this monk is doing this at this point of time, is that a symbol of this? And did you mean to say that? And he said, well, I don't know. I'm the writer, and if I could have said it in any other way, I would have said it in another way. It's like, you can't ask me that question. So he nurtured this kind of cult around the openness, and this is true. Think about The God of Small Things, which is a novel that is very localized in a sense, but that has traveled extremely well, and that stirs people. I know people diaspora Malayalis read the novel as something that is from home and that is deeply a Carolese experience. And the question is, I mean, would this have been possible with a translation, or what would that book have looked like if it had been written originally in Malayalam?
Might have been a lot better.
But I have connected to that. I have a question. I have a question for Salma. Actually, for Salma, or for anybody, but directed to Salma and to Chalapathy too, to people who actively produce literature, produce writing in Tamil. Given all these bold steps that you've been talking about, that we find words for anal sex now, we can speak about anything. Are there things you can think of you cannot possibly write about in Tamil?
Really useful to have a word.
இப்போ முன்னாடி இருந்த நிலைமையை விட இப்போ நிறைய மாற்றங்கள் இருக்குது தமிழ் இலக்கியத்தில். குறிப்பாக பெண்களுடைய எழுத்துக்கள் அது எல்லாருக்குமே தெரியும். எழுத முடியாத ஒரு விஷயங்கிறது இப்போ இல்லை, எல்லாத்தையுமே எழுத முடியுங்கிற ஒரு நம்பிக்கை வந்திருக்கு. இப்போ எழுதுறேன்னா பின்னாடி எழுதலாம் அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு நம்பிக்கை உருவாயிருக்கு. பட் நான் பெண்களுக்கு மதம் என்ன செய்யுது எதிராக அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு விஷயத்த தொடர்ந்து எழுதணும் அப்படின்னு ஒரு மனசுக்குள்ள ஒரு ஆர்வம் இருந்துகிட்டு இருந்தாங்க. அதனால் எல்லா மதமுமே பெண்களுக்கு எதிராக இருக்கு. அது குறித்த ஒரு விஷயத்த என்னால் இப்போ இல்லைனாலும் ஃபியூச்சரில் எழுத முடியாதுங்கிற ஒரு கவலை எனக்கு. அது ரொம்ப அடிப்படையாக பெண்ணோட எல்லா மதத்துலேயுமே பெண்ணுடைய வாழ்க்கையை ரொம்ப மோசமான ஒரு இடத்துல வச்சுருக்கு. இன்னைக்கு வரைக்கும் அந்த வாழ்க்கையை சூழல்லையும் நினைக்கிறேன்.
Conditions that prevail gives the hope that you can write about anything, because the situation has changed very much and people have started writing. If we are not able to write certain things now, probably in future we will write about it. Such a hope is prevalent. However, the role of religion in containing or suppressing or oppressing women, can one write about it? There is a fear. It's not just Islam, it's about any religion. All the religions play an oppressive role against women. Will you be able to write against it, about it? Is still a fear ever.
See, I have to say that, well, on the one hand, it's true that there are new spaces that are opening up, and Salma herself has opened up some of them. And there is something, very positive about that. It's very easy to get into a kind of illusion about this. My own feeling is actually that the space of literary expressivity in Tamil has shrunk enormously over the last 150 years.
150 years?
150 years, yeah. If you compare it, see, I'm a medievalist and all that, but if you look at the expressive power, we were talking about Naidam the other day. Look at the Naidam, and then look at the modern writers. The gulf is absolutely immense. See, I want to put it in another way. I don't think it's a question of exactly which topics we're writing about. And actually, I agree very much with Narayana that the sort of social program, I think it's in a way, perhaps it's even a hindrance to what is happening. See, take the notion we've just been talking about subversion for the last half hour as if it was a good thing. I mean, does poetry have to be subversive? Wonderful poetry is poetry that has a particular kind of expressivity, and perhaps some kind of newness. Right? It can sometimes be subversive. I'm not against it, but I'm also not for it particularly. I would rather to see if the poetry has its own innate power and expressivity. I want to say another thing about that. See, I think that what we've lost in Tamil, it seems to me, I'm an outsider, but I read Tamil all the time. Okay, so it seems to me what has been lost is a particular kind of relatedness to the earlier materials. You see, Tamil is after all like Greek, or like Arabic, or like Hebrew, or like Chinese. These are the great traditions. After all, there's 2,000 years of Tamil poetry, right? In all of these literatures that I just mentioned, there's a particular, range of very rich relatednesses to the classical materials. Nobody's producing material in Greek that's like classical Greek. But they stand in some kind of living, difficult, ironic, inverted, relationship to those materials. And I feel that in Tamil, with the somewhat superficial relation to Sangam poetry, I think it's a superficial relation. But in Tamil, that complexity has been largely lost. And you see, and I just want to say one last thing about that. When I was listening to Salma read this morning, I still don't have a feel yet for the novel. I have to read the whole novel to feel it. But I felt the thing that is powerful, I felt there's something very powerful in this book. And I think it also comes through in Lakshmi's translation. But what is powerful to me is not the theme, the social theme of protest, and this kind of, all of these things that we've been talking about as if they were the point. They have a point. I'm not denying that. They have a very important point. I respect and admire what she's done. But I felt that there was a particular texture in that novel, in those episodes, some new texture, something surprisingly new. And I don't know what the fate of the book would be. I can't say, but it seemed to me that that was what mattered to me.
I'm so glad you said that, because it's those qualities that I think are more really. I'm so glad you said that. Those are the qualities.
David, I really want to. You have really thrown a gauntlet. I think unless you actually stop me, I'm not going to stop. But
I was looking at you.
Yes,
as you can see.
David, we find your work exciting. We take your point that the Tamil literary canon, has got little skewed in favor of Sangam literature. The kind of attention that pre-colonial, pre-modern literature in Tamil should have got it has not really got it. Religious literature have been given short shrift. Everything is point is well taken, but I think when modern literature and pre-colonial literature, I think they are two different creatures in a certain sense. The entire context is different. How these texts are produced, how they are circulated, what is the society in which it is circulated. It's a completely different creatures that we are talking about, without factoring that in. I would find it very disturbing to to say that the kind of points that you are making. But let me go a little further. I think I do not agree that there is this disjunct between the pre-modern and modern literature. It is almost all good writing is resonant with so many things from earlier literature. I am not just referring to the big classical poems. Just I'll give you one example. Salma's one of her well-known poems is called, of course, Oru Malayum Innoru Malayum. That's also the title of the. When I read that poem, the first thing that struck me was a poem from Thiruvalluva Malai, which is some 20-30 verses in praise of Tirukkural. I can assure you that Salma has not read it. I also cross-checked with her. The poem goes something like this. It says, it's a beautiful poem. It says, there is one evening where there is the full moon. There is also another evening which doesn't have the moon at all. But both are called moons. Similarly, Thiruvalluvar is called a poet, and Chalapathy is also called a poet. There's a sense of it. So, this phrase of Oru Malayum Innoru Malayum, this is not what she is referring to, but the tradition, in a sense, is somehow imbibed, and it comes. Suddenly, when in the passage that was being read in the morning, she had used a term called, when these young girls are trying to get this Ahmad to buy the ticket. Nayandu pesiyavadu avadinu oru vaartha undu. I'll tell you, I've not heard this term in colloquial usage or in written usage for a very, very long time. Suddenly it comes from a school dropout. I think, the continuity of Tamil literature is very, very, it is very much there. Certain texts take precedence at certain times. Certain other texts precedence at certain times. But
can I
yes,
say something? See, of course it's there. In a way, that's the point I was trying to make yesterday. Of course it's there. The intertexts are actually present. But what I'm talking about is a particular kind of complex relationship, a living, vibrant relationship to these texts. See, look at a Greek poet like Zephyrus, for example. He won the Nobel Prize. He's a totally modern poet, He's absolutely as modern as Pasuvaya. But you can't read a single line in Zephyrus without feeling that he's actually exploring and pushing that whole classical world in amazingly complex ways. You can't say that about Sundara Ramaswamy. I like his poems, but you can't say it.
Yes, which takes me back to one of the points I just threw yesterday. There's one stream of writing in modern Tamil literature, especially represented by the little magazines, consciously, because of their antipathy to the Dravidian movement and Dravidian movement politics, they kind of, close many of the conduits that could, the wellsprings that could have enriched them. That was a conscious decision. So if you look into Pasuvaya, in fact, once Sundara Ramaswamy said that consciously, I have never used a proverb in my writing. And I never quoted a single poem, poem from pre-modern literature. Never he did, consciously. And in fact, that was because of that, that he wrote a brilliant essay about Thiruvalluvar without quoting Tirukkural at all. Yeah, so you can sometimes what is a shackle can also, pave the way for great amount of cultural expressivity. But I have no doubt at all that, the range of Tamil language's capacity to express various both social, political, psychological situations, I think its range is vastly expanded.
Can I also say that with the Sri Lankan poets, I think you probably have that close continuity with classical literature. And they've been very much more conscious of how to use Yapi Lakanani. and never lost that, I
That's
think.
interesting.
And I'm thinking of Sivasegaran, who is so modern a poet in a sense, but can do all the tricks and can make all those allusions. And it's very close. I think he has such a good ear for Tamil poetry and has those links and betrays those continuities as well.
Lakshmi, I'm delighted that, just have one more point. Lakshmi, I'm delighted that you talked about Sri Lankan Tamil poetry. It was with 1983, especially the publication of Cheran's poetry, that the modern Tamil poets, self-avowedly modern Tamil poets, said, okay, it's not wrong to write politics in poetry.
Yes.
That dawning came to them only at that moment. Only after that, modern poetry began to really take up political issues in Tamil Nadu. I mean, when I say modern, this particular group that, David is alluding to, and also the poets associated with the Little Magazine tradition, which I mentioned yesterday. Sorry.
I have two comments that I can't quite bring to question, so they're on two different planes. But one is, I think there might have been a little overlay with this conference that could have gone along with the textbook one that we all missed because it was yesterday, and that some of the response to what's coming forth in the literature is being responded to by the fundamental elements, whether it's in the Muslim community. I think there's probably a similar one echoing this protest against sexuality in the Hindu community of India, and that there might have been some of the same forces pushing in the society, and maybe that was discussed in the textbook conference yesterday. So I don't know if that's something going on with new expressions and tug and pull that goes with that.
Those publications have ever influenced anybody. If you ask contemporary Spanish writers, did you ever read that translation? They would probably say yes. I mean, we heard about it, we read it, but it didn't make that impact that, for example, translations of Hermann Hesse, the German writer, made into Spanish, which are universally read all over the place for some strange reason. I'm not really sure why, but well, time's up. But I have one. I mean, given that we are talking about translation, one final.
But wait, there is a recall that Bama was reading Dostoevsky. In Tamil, and there's been a long tradition of translating into Tamil as well. That is quite vibrant, and especially the Russians in particular, which have been very powerful. So I guess I wanted to say I was when I'm thinking about Talal Asad, I was just teaching it, so it was in my head, and what you said resonated with Narayana said resonated with it as well, but it's actually not true.
And this would be my last and final question. What, again involving Salma, which kinds of books would you like to have translated into Tamil? Can you think of any?
பெரும்பாலும் உலகத்தில் இருக்கிற பல்வேறு விஷயங்களை புதிய விஷயங்களை நான் டிரான்ஸ்லேஷன் ஒர்க் மூலமாக தான் கற்றுக்கிட்டேன். அது சென் கவிதைகள்னா என்ன, அப்புறம் பிரெஞ்சு இலக்கியங்கள், அப்புறம் ஜெர்மன் இலக்கியங்கள், ரஷ்யன் இலக்கியம், இது மாதிரி எல்லா விஷயங்களுமே டிரான்ஸ்லேஷன் மூலமாக தான் எனக்கு கிடச்சிருக்கு. எல்லாருக்குமே அப்படியே தமிழில் கிடச்சிருக்கு. அது ஒரு முக்கியமான அந்த அளவுக்கு இப்போ டிரான்ஸ்லேஷன் ஒர்க் வர்றது ரொம்ப குறைவாக இருக்குது. அது ரொம்ப அவசியமான ஒரு விஷயம். இது எல்லாத்தையும் விட நான் ஃபிக்ஸட் அந்த மாதிரி விஷயங்கள் அதிகமாக வேணும் அப்படின்னு நினைக்கிறேன். இவங்க அந்த ஒரு விஷயங்களும் கூடவே வரணும் இலக்கியங்கள்.
She has read German, French, and other literature only in translation, and the translations have been very useful to know about the matters that are there and the way they describe things. And so translations play a major role in understanding other cultures. She wants non-fiction also to come in translations. They are not, they are scarce. Yeah. And she would like to have non-fiction in translation.
We have one final question, remark.
I want to make just one comment. Having gone to college in Chennai, my colleagues don't read and write in Tamil. And we constantly talk in English and when going to English-speaking schools. And so the college-going urban young crowd, we are talking about translation in a global context. But for Salma to be known in the urban colleges, her work has to be translated. And that is very important.
I think Valerie said Doshabdam, but it was immediately translated in my mind to Nanajan, and so, but it won't be long. So this conference has been a very special conference for me at least, and this is not just because of the incredibly stimulating intellectual environment. And I challenge you to think of a more impressive lineup of speakers, or just think of all the kind of media that we've heard and we're exposed to: sermons, little magazines, large magazines, film, verse, prose, novel, folklore, Russian literature, even Sanskrit. But no, that's not why this conference was so special for me. The last 2 days were special for me because they were more than just delicious food for thought. They were also intensely emotional. And this is primarily because of 2 people. One of them whom I have known and loved, but who is no longer with us. That's Norman Cutler. And the other who I have not met till this week, but who has touched me deep in my soul, and that's Salma. Friends and students of Norman have spoke of him yesterday. They described his scholarly legacy, his generosity and his dedication to his students, his gentle manner and his trademark shy smile. And I've certainly witnessed all of these in my years as his student. But I also want to evoke I won't add to that, but I want to evoke his unique personal and intellectual honesty. There was never a shred of falsity about Norman. He never pretended to be who he wasn't or know what he didn't. And these are rare traits, definitely in this weird academic world. It takes courage to keep your integrity, to be true to yourself and to the world. And as I think more of Norman, I realize he in his way, was a brave person. Brave to be honest and modest, brave to carry himself around in the world with a medical condition he hardly ever spoke about, a genetic disorder, illness, the seriousness of which I fully realized only in this tragic year when his sister passed away and shortly thereafter. So Norman was a man of words, and he may have used hearing aids, but he had an ear for words, for the different flavors and shades of meanings. So I think he would have loved to have met someone. There is a Hebrew saying, another language, I want to evoke my mother tongue, a Hebrew saying, Chaim v'mavet be'ad lashon. Language is a matter of life and death. And I can't think of a better example of this than Salma's inspirational life story. Because it's her voice, her poetry, that kept her alive and sane in a world of incredibly harsh oppression. Her words survived constant efforts of silencing and censorship and ended up releasing her from her confinement. And what is so unique about her poetic voice, and I think this is why Norman would have appreciated it, is its unbelievable honesty, courageous honesty. told Salma yesterday. One could read books upon books and essays upon essays about the battle of the sexes and power relations and gender, but not come across such a clear, incessant, and honest statement as one finds in her poem, Contract, in this beautiful translation that we heard yesterday by Lakshmi Holmström. I was deeply moved when I heard you read that poem yesterday. So I asked you to join me in thanking all of these people and institutions who have made this very special conference possible. First and foremost, I want you to join me in thanking Valerie Ritter, who thought of this idea and worked tirelessly to make it happen. And excuse me for 1 second. And so, appreciation of that. And I also want to thank Sasha, the other co-organizer of this conference, and also Chalapathy, who was like, in a way, our advisor and also co-organizer, and worked very hard and behind the scene to make this happen. I want to thank Sally Noble and Sarah Nelson and the entire COSAS community and the COSAS support for this. This would not have happened without the help of COSAS. I want to thank Steve Commons and the SALC department. And
I'm Russian.
You came prematurely.
Sally might burn down by the end of
I want to thank Dean Allen, who came to our Institute, and everybody here, and Anjali and Jai Shankar. And finally, I want to thank Salma.